Hi guys, my name is Keesha Metcalfe with MVP Realty, and today we're going to be looking at the differences between an inspection and an appraisal. Now let's start off with the inspection. Now the inspection is normally done right after an offer is accepted. So the buyer puts in their offer, the offer is accepted by the seller, and now we go into what is called the inspection period, or it's called the due diligence period. Now, during this time, the buyer is going to contract with a licensed home inspector, and that home inspector is going to go to the subject property with the aim of inspecting the property to make sure that it is in good condition. Now, normally the inspector is looking at four major areas. They are going to be looking at the roofing, they are looking at the plumbing, they are looking at the electrical systems, and they are looking at the HVAC systems, meaning the heating and, the AC, the heating and the cooling systems. Now in Florida, we're not too concerned about the heating, but we are very concerned about the cooling or the AC. So the inspector comes in, and the inspector is going to be looking thoroughly at the roof to ensure that the roof is actually safe, to ensure that that roof is livable, that roof is sound. They are looking at the plumbing to ensure that everything is working properly, the electrical work to ensure that there are no hidden dangers, there's nothing that might be, can cause a fire or anything like that. They're generally looking to ensure that everything is in working order and that these systems are safe and they are sound. So that is the main duty of the inspector, to go in and ensure that everything is working. Now it is the buyer who pays the inspector to come in and to look at these systems to ensure that they are in working order. And the inspector, at the end of it, he produces an inspection report. Now normally, a lot of times the inspection report is several pages long, and the buyers freak out, like, this property does not look like it is in good condition. But this is something that happens quite regularly. It is quite common. Even in brand new construction homes, you are going to find the inspector normally finds some issues, and it is their job to just, document everything that they find about that property. It is their job to inform the buyers what is happening with all these systems so that the buyer can make an informed decision about whether or not they want to proceed with the purchase of this property. Okay. All right, so that is what an inspection is all about. Now let's look at the appraisal. Now the appraisal normally comes a little further down in the buying process. So we have done our inspections. Let's say we have done our inspections. The buyer is satisfied that this property is something that they want to go ahead and purchase. And so once the buyer goes to their lender, the lender is going to order what is called an appraisal. Now, the purpose of the appraisal is to determine the fair market value of the subject property. The lender wants to ensure that the property actually has the value that has been contracted on that property. So for example, let's say the buyer and seller agree that property will be sold at a price of $400,000. The appraisal is done so that the appraiser can look to see whether or not this property actually values $400,000. Because at the end of the day, the lender is lending based on the value of the property. Okay, so what the appraiser normally does is they can use several different methods to determine the fair market value of a property. But what happens a lot of times is that they will go in and they will look for similar properties to that property. So they are looking for properties that are similar in age, properties that are similar in size, similar in features, and properties that are located within half a mile usually of the subject property, right? Usually up to half a mile. Now sometimes they will go out a little further if they're unable to find enough comparable properties within that half a mile. So the appraiser is looking at all these comparable properties. He is looking at properties like the subject property that have actually sold within, let's say, the last 120 days. They are looking for other properties that are currently under contract that are similar to the subject property, and they are also looking at the other active listings that are on the market that are similar to the subject property. And they are looking at all of this information, and based on that information they are going to determine a value, a fair market value for this property. Now this is similar to what your realtor would do for you when they do a comparative market analysis. The only thing is that when the realtor does it, the realtor does not charge you separately for doing that, and realtors are not appraisers, but we do know how to come up with fair market values of properties based on the comparative properties. So our process as realtors is very similar to what the appraiser does, but the appraiser is a third party who comes in and gives their opinion of the fair market value of that property. So the buyer is the one who pays for that appraisal. Even though it is ordered by the lender, it is the buyer who pays for the appraisal, and the buyer normally gets a copy of that appraisal report where the appraiser outlines exactly how they came up with that value, and they're going to show what comparable properties that they used in order to come up with a value for the subject property. So the buyer gets a copy, and sometimes if the seller requests, the buyer can give the seller a copy of the appraisal, but it is not a requirement, right? It's up to the buyer to decide whether or not they want to share the appraisal details with the seller. Now, sometimes sellers may order appraisals for themselves, and this usually happens when a seller is trying to establish a fair market price for their property because they may not have sufficient comparable properties. The realtor may not be able to find sufficient properties in order to make a decision about a fair listing price for that property. So the seller might actually order an appraisal at the beginning of the process when they're trying to decide what is a good price to list that property at. However, bear in mind, sellers, that if you do that, even if you do that, the bank is going to order their separate appraisal. They're going to use their own appraiser, and they're going to get their own appraisal on that property. And it is the appraisal results of the appraiser that they use that they will use to determine the market value of that property. So what can happen is that there are discrepancies, there are differences between what the lender's appraiser valued the house at and what the seller's appraiser valued the house at, especially if the lender's appraisal comes in lower than the seller's appraisal, and that can cause issues. It is the lender's appraisal that is going to prevail. So if you decide to spend money and do an appraisal, just know that if there's a difference, it is the lender's appraisal that normally prevails. All right. So those are the main differences between an inspection and an appraisal. An inspection is to look at the working order of the property, how the systems are working to ensure that the property is safe and sound. The appraisal is to determine the fair market value of that property. So there you have it, guys. Those are the differences between an inspection and an appraisal. Again, my name is Keesha Metcalfe with MVP Realty. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to discuss about the home buying or home selling process, feel free to reach out. I'm going to leave my contact details in the description box below. Please feel free to reach out to me. And guys, have yourselves a great week, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Bye bye.